So I'm going to tell you exactly why Aljamain Sterling is not going to beat Henry Cejudo UFC 288. So first of all, we're going to start with Aljamain Sterling. I just want to make it clear that I think he's an absolutely fantastic fighter. One of his biggest skills is his speed and his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Those two key attributes is why he's been so successful so far in the UFC. What I find really good about Aljamain Sterling is his ability to be able to capitalize on small openings when he's on his feet. And when he does that, his ability to transition to in his grappling game and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. With Aljamain Sterling, he does actually have quite good wrestling as well. He's able to utilize his wrestling to get the fight on the ground, but that's where he absolutely shines. I've noticed within his ground game, the way he transitions between different positions is quite impressive to watch. The way he moves his hips to cut angles on people is actually quite advanced, and the way he follows that up with like the leg across the back, get people's positioning off balance is absolutely fantastic. It's a lot for a lot of people to deal with. Even at bantamweight, where a lot of the people are very quick, he's one of the fastest I've seen. I think that's his biggest asset. Now, he's not too bad on the feet either, but I think that's where he really shines, and that's how he's been so dominant within the UFC so far. He hasn't really gotten the respect he deserves because of the way that he won the title. As we all know, he was facing Peter Yan, and that fight ended in a DQ, and ultimately Aljamain Sterling got awarded the victory there after Peter Yan landed an illegal knee. If we're being completely honest, that fight wasn't exactly going Aljamain Sterling's way. In the first round or two, he was doing quite well, but Peter Yan just wore on him, but ultimately Peter Yan made a fatal mistake, did the illegal knee, and rightfully so, Aljamain Sterling won the title. He couldn't continue, but I don't think anyone was really happy with the way that fight ended, and you could just tell Dana White wasn't too thrilled with it at the end of the fight either. Due to the way that he won the title, Aljamain Sterling hasn't really got the respect that he deserves. Now, I know ultimately I'm picking against Aljamain Sterling, and you'll be able to see why towards the end of this video, but he did come out against TJ Dillashaw as well and got a very impressive victory. But again, unfortunately for Aljamain, TJ Dillashaw did come into that fight with a shoulder injury. You see within the first minute of the fight, it was popping in and out of the socket, not really getting the respect he deserves as a champion. And I think it's a shame the way the last few fights have ended for him. A lot of people are sleeping on Aljamain and think that he's not on the level of Henry Cejudo. He has 22 wins and only 3 losses within the UFC. Now, considering that that's 25 bouts in total in a division that's as competitive as bantamweight, it is very impressive. You know, it's just unfortunate the last couple of times has sort of overshadowed all the work he done before that. What really shows the level that he's on is what he did to Corey Sandhagen. You know, that was an absolute demolition. And as we know recently with Corey Sandhagen versus Cheeto Vera, that Corey Sandhagen is no easy opponent for anyone. He absolutely picked apart Cheeto, and the way that Aljamain Sterling got his back and just synced in that rear naked choke with all in a couple of minutes was absolutely very, very impressive. He outstruck Corey Sandhagen on the feet with his speed. He got 2 takedowns. He went for 2 submissions, and ultimately one of those landed. So he does have quite an impressive resume. So why do I think Henry Cejudo is going to come back and knock off Aljamain Sterling? Why am I picking him here? He's been out for a few years. Well, a lot of you guys might not be familiar with Henry Cejudo because he has been retired over the last few years. Henry Cejudo is a 2-division champion within the UFC. Not many people have been able to achieve such a feat. And on top of that, he's an Olympic gold medalist. Henry Cejudo is a fantastic wrestler, and it's one of the top skills that I think is a requirement within the UFC these days. Now, there are exceptions, but even the guys that are dominant with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu have some form of wrestling there to be able to get the fight where they want it. Wrestling is important because it does get the fight where you want it to take place. Now, when I consider the level of wrestling that Henry Cejudo has, it's going to be miles ahead of Aljamain Sterling. What concerns me for Aljamain here is his ability to be able to get that fight to the ground. It's going to be very difficult for him to get Henry Cejudo to the ground. It's going to be very difficult for him to implement one of the parts of his games where I think he's going to have the most success. There's levels within grappling. You've got the wrestling, which is obviously the standing up and the takedown aspect. And once it hits the floor in wrestling, they tend to like reposition. Whereas in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I think Aljamain Sterling's dominant style is, the fight's only started once it's hit the ground. So they do a lot more work in Jiu-Jitsu on the ground aspect of grappling. So it's really going to depend on Henry Cejudo. Is he at the level he was when we seen him leave? Can Aljamain Sterling do something to get the fight where he needs it to happen to be able to score a victory here? I'm doubtful, to be completely honest, and I think that it's going to be too much for Aljamain Sterling to overcome. Now, granted, he does have the ability to be able to knock out Henry. He is very quick on his feet, but Henry Cejudo, he's very quick at bouncing and jumping on opportunities. If he notices an opportunity, whether it be on his feet or not, he's going to capitalize on that. And you could see over the last few years of Henry Cejudo's career that his striking really developed, and he got really confident within it. You know, he's like, I can knock these guys out. I don't have to wrestle them. A smaller man is going to be a lot more difficult to be able to take down. I know this from personal experience because I train myself. And when I'm facing a much smaller guy, it's not necessarily always an advantage when you're wrestling or grappling them, because when you're grappling, the hips come into it a lot and getting underhooks come into it a lot. And a smaller guy can ball up a lot better, and it's harder to get hooks in on them. It's harder to get an underhook. It's harder to get the takedown because you've got to bend down a lot lower as well. Very tricky, very agile, very flexible, and it can be quite a lot to deal with. So I don't think Aljamain Sterling is going to be able to take Henry down, and I think ultimately this is going to frustrate Aljamain Sterling, and I think Henry Cejudo is going to be able to give him a lot of trouble on the feet and ultimately get the win here. I think Henry Cejudo is going to win it by a decision. I don't see him knocking out Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling tends to have a pretty good chin. Can't see Henry Cejudo submitting him. He's not very well known for a lot of submissions. And don't forget as well, Henry Cejudo's resume is absolutely fantastic. He holds a record of 16 wins and 2 losses. Now, obviously, when you just look at the win-loss percentage, it seems like Aljamain Sterling's is more impressive, but when I look at the level of competition that Henry Cejudo has beat, it is much more impressive than the level of competition that Aljamain Sterling has beat. He knocked out Dominic Cruz and just pounced on him, which was absolutely fantastic to see. Because as we know, Dominic Cruz is a very dynamic striker and very tricky on the feet, and Henry Cejudo made absolutely short work of him. Knocked out Marlon Moraes, and as we know, Marlon Moraes is an absolutely fantastic striker as well. And who can forget the fight where he became the double champ against TJ Dillashaw? That fight was over quicker than I could ever expect. The ads weren't even finished rolling, and he knocked him out by KO. So as you can see, not only does Henry have great wrestling, he has knockout power. His last 3 performances was really coming into his own on the feet, and I think his wrestling has a lot to do with that. I mean, if you've got an Olympic level wrestler in front of you, you're always going to be looking down and being very wary of that takedown because you realize the danger there. If Henry Cejudo's wins towards the latter end of his career came by KO, I'm keeping in mind that he might be a little bit rusty with a few years off. Obviously, he's a bit older. My body is absolutely banged up. My shoulders are cooked. I've got no tendons in my right shoulder. I get work on it constantly. It's just not for older men. You know, as you get older, your body can't handle as much punishment, and combat sports is absolutely brutal on your body. So I'm sure Henry Cejudo has many injuries over the years, especially competing in a sport like wrestling. So ultimately it will catch up to him at some point, but I think he's been taking care of himself really well while he's been off. He's been training quite a bit. We've seen his footage of training John Jones, and I still think he's going to be pretty sharp. You know, he's pretty fit and leads a healthy lifestyle from what I understand. So I don't think it's going to be enough for Aljamain Sterling to get the victory over him, even factoring in that Henry is a little bit older. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, because ultimately I think it's going to be a fantastic fight. And ultimately, when fighters do come back after a long layoff, a lot of the times they can't handle it, they lose, they're not the same as what they used to be. So it'll be interesting to see how Henry Cejudo performs at this event. Do you think Aljamain Sterling is going to get the wing here? Like, am I completely off with my prediction? Time will tell, but let me know, and thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. I'll catch you guys later.